Welcome in to CBS News 24/7. I'm Elizabeth Cook. We're keeping a close eye on the White House, where President Trump is sitting down right now with the Prime Minister of Norway. And he's taking questions from reporters about tariff talks with China and whether Russian President Vladimir Putin will listen to him after telling Putin to stop those deadly attacks on Kyiv. And a live look now inside St. Peter's Basilica, where mourners have been waiting for hours to say goodbye to Pope Francis. We'll have more on the funeral preparations as the world pays tribute to the People's Pope. Plus, a Venezuelan immigrant reportedly takes a wrong turn in Detroit while working as a delivery driver and then ends up being deported. The case getting attention out of the Midwest. Plus, arson charges in an East Coast wildfire causing air quality issues and sending smoke over the New York City skyline. And there is President Trump greeting Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre at the White House today. There he is. All this amid global tensions on trade and the war in Ukraine. Let's bring in CBS News Chief White House reporter Willie James Inman. He joins us now. Willie, great to be with you. The president took some questions from the press and was asked about trade talks with China. What did he say?
Yeah, that's right, Liz. The president said that those negotiations remain ongoing. I'll point out that the Chinese have pushed back and said essentially that any progress or any of these conversations essentially are groundless, potentially sending signals that there's not any movement happening there. But this White House continues to push and say that those conversations are happening. The president didn't allude to who necessarily the U.S. government was speaking with, but we do, of course, know that Chinese goods face a 145% tariff. That includes the reciprocal tariff and the fentanyl tariff that the United States put on Chinese goods. So they're perhaps looking for some type of deal here. I'll also mention that the president is looking to talk to other nations as well, including Norway. We, of course, know that Norway is a key ally in Europe, shares a lengthy border with Russia, of course, concerned about the ongoing war, the ongoing conflict with Ukraine and Russia. So perhaps there'll be some conversations about NATO. The president mentioned that trade will come up. Potentially there'll be a deal there. Probably not an announcement, though, but certainly the tensions and the conversations or lack thereof that are happening are certainly something that we're watching here closely at the White House.
And Willie, before today's meeting with Norway, the president posted a message to Russian President Vladimir Putin. What exactly did he say?
Yeah, that's right. I think we can bring that message up on screen for our viewers. He says that he's not happy with the Russian strikes on Kyiv. He goes on to say not necessary and a very bad timing, and he tells the president of Russia to stop. I'll note that the president was asked whether or not he believes that Putin is listening to him during this meeting that's ongoing just now, and he essentially said that he believes that is the case. Still these negotiations ongoing between Russia and Ukraine, the United States playing a key role there. I'll note that just last week, the Secretary of State mentioned that the U.S. wasn't necessarily going to continue to fly around the world to try to get Ukraine and Russia to come to an agreement. The president oftentimes will say that he has nothing to do with Russia. That it is essentially Biden's war, the former president. But still, this is the president that is the commander-in-chief now, looking to create a deal between Russia and Ukraine. Of course, we know that those conversations continue in the weeks ahead, but still, the president voicing his frustration, at least publicly, with Russia's Vladimir Putin and those ongoing attacks there in Ukraine.
And also happening today at the White House, there behind you, Willie, we understand Trump is going to meet with the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, which, of course, was involved in that Signal group chat controversy. He was involved in that group chat. What can you tell us about this meeting?
Yeah, this perhaps couldn't have come at a better time, right? The president mentioned this on Truth Social, that he will be meeting with Jeffrey Goldberg, who, of course, as you mentioned perfectly, is a journalist from The Atlantic. He posted the Truth Social post there. The part that I want to point out is he's saying that they will write an article entitled "The Most Consequential President of This Century," and he said that he's doing an interview out of curiosity with these journalists, not only Jeffrey Goldberg, but Michael Shearer and Ashley Parker will be there as well. So we'll perhaps have to wait and see in terms of what comes out of that interview that is set to take place. But the president posting about it on Truth Social there, as you can see. Interesting timing, of course, because this comes after the first Signalgate story and the second Signalgate story, which the Pentagon and the White House have fiercely pushed back on, Liz.
I think a lot of people are going to be tuning into the Atlantic tomorrow to see what that interview was all about. All right, Willie James Inman, thank you so much. All right, happening soon, a federal judge holding a hearing about the 133 international students whose visas were revoked by the Trump administration. This after Judge Victoria Calvert issued a temporary restraining order blocking the government from terminating the legal statuses of those students. So let's bring in CBS News Department of Justice correspondent Scott McFarland, who has been following this story for us. Scott, what's the play here by lawyers?
They want more time. They want a longer freeze put in place. You know, there's so many cases in so many parts of the country involving deportations or the potential stripping of visas from college students. It's easy to lose track or get disoriented, but this is one to focus on in Georgia. This impacts roughly 130 college students and the Trump administration's efforts to strip their visas and potentially queue them up for deportation. On Tuesday, a federal judge in Georgia issued a short-term freeze to all that for a closer look and a deeper review. They're back in court today trying to extend that freeze further to keep these students on their campuses, to keep their visas in their pockets, and to keep them from the potential trajectory towards deportation. But this also is a case that's growing larger than just those 130 students. You can see as the Trump administration makes more moves against more students in other parts of the country, this ruling could have outsized impacts on cases still to come.
Yeah, there are a lot of cases, as you mentioned, that we are following. Let's switch now to the case involving Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who was the Maryland father who was deported to El Salvador. What's the very latest on his case?
Federal judge overseeing that case in Maryland has just pushed back a deadline. She's now agreed to wait until Wednesday of next week for the administration to answer some pivotal questions here, including about a return of Abrego Garcia from the Salvadoran detention center, and also why he's there in the first place, and a whole series of other questions Abrego Garcia's lawyers have put forward. They pushed the deadline back from what was supposed to be a yesterday deadline, and here's what's curious. The administration's lawyers and the plaintiff's lawyers for Abrego Garcia seem to have come to a consensus on something. They both agreed to push back deadlines, indicating that there may be some agreement happening between these two sides, which would be quite intriguing considering this is a national cause now, the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. We'll find out for sure Wednesday. We noticed a couple documents were filed on the court docket yesterday, which could give us some insight, but they were sealed from public view. We expect more revelations in the days ahead.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing the legal pushback to all of this. We're also hearing the American Civil Liberties Union is appealing to the Supreme Court. What do you know about that?
The ACLU wants the Supreme Court to better spell out what they mean when they say due process, as all these deportation controversies swirl around the country and as more pop up each day. We recall the Supreme Court ruled a few days ago that if the Trump administration wants to use that 18th century emergency war power, the Alien Enemies Act, not used since Japanese deportations are internments in World War II, that they have to ensure due process is offered first. The ACLU, challenging on behalf of would-be deportees, says they'd like the Supreme Court to better explain what they mean by due process to ensure it's being offered or to know if it's not. We'll see how the High Court comes out on that one, but you can just see on this case, too, how there are going to be other cases that pop up where there could be an impact from that ruling.
All right, CBS News Department of Justice correspondent Scott McFarland. Thank you, Scott. Well, another deportation to El Salvador to tell you about, this time a 32-year-old Venezuelan migrant who took a wrong turn onto the Ambassador Bridge crossing into Canada. Our partners at CBS News Detroit picked up the story. Let's listen to their coverage from earlier today.
Also this hour, the efforts to right a wrong turn. A 32-year-old Metro Detroit man kicked out of the country after making an honest mistake while delivering food. And as our Heath Kalb found out, he may not be alone.
We're concerned that, again, a wrong turn at the border really shouldn't mean that our neighbors are disappearing.
32-year-old Venezuelan immigrant Ricardo Prada Vasquez was reportedly delivering McDonald's in January when he made a wrong turn onto the Ambassador Bridge, crossing into Canada. It's a common mistake here in Detroit.
I was actually supposed to go on Verner, and next thing you know, I was on the bridge.
But for Vasquez, it was a costly mistake. According to the New York Times, the 32-year-old was detained on January 15th while attempting to re-enter the U.S. at the Detroit-Windsor Tunnel and was taken into custody by U.S. authorities. No one knew of his whereabouts until the Department of Homeland Security confirmed on social media on Tuesday that he was sent to El Salvador, claiming that he was a member of a criminal organization called Tren de Aragua. But immigration rights experts like Christine Salve say that what's concerning about this case and others during this new administration is that people have been deported without due process.
We've seen long-term detentions where they shouldn't be happening, and there's no oversight or body to look into these matters and investigate them. All persons in the United States, regardless of their immigration status, no matter who they are or where they're from, have rights to due process.
The Michigan Immigrant Rights Center, the ACLU, and Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib are looking into the detentions and disappearances. More on that part of the story coming up this afternoon.
And coming up after the break, we'll take you to the Vatican, where thousands are waiting for hours just to pay their respects to Pope Francis. We have new reporting from Rome. You're watching CBS News 24/7. Now to that massive Russian attack on the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. At least 12 people were killed and more than 70 injured by a Russian barrage of 70 missiles and 150 drones. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky cutting short his trip to South Africa in the wake of these attacks. And it's also happening as Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte at the Pentagon on the next steps to all of this. We're joined now by CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata. Charlie, what are we going to expect from today's meeting between Hegseth and the NATO Secretary General?
Yeah, so the Secretary General arrived here around 8 o'clock this morning. There were a lot of smiles, but no comment from either gentleman as they made their way upstairs to the Defense Secretary's office. It'd be interesting to see if there's anything concrete that comes out of the meetings, because there are sort of competing agendas here. Secretary Hegseth and President Trump, for that matter, have said that NATO and European partners, for that matter, have got to take a more robust lead, particularly in the war in Ukraine, especially with the events that have been unfolding in the past couple of weeks. And they're demanding that NATO countries pony up their fair share. And it's already started happening. In fact, they call it the Trump effect. But at the same time, the Secretary General is here too, and his agenda is try to make sure that neither Secretary Hegseth or President Trump are sort of pushing Ukraine into a peace deal that they're not happy with against their will. But NATO partners, and Ukraine for that matter, know full well that U.S. military aid is on the line and patience is growing thin at the White House.
Yeah, and when you look at this massive attack on Kyiv, it appears that Russia has no intention for peace. Is that accurate?
Well, you know, sad to say that it's right out of Putin's playbook. And I have to say, you mentioned those numbers, and having been in cities like Kyiv when they've come under bombardment like that, or Sumy or Kharkiv, the Ukrainians have a pretty good air defense system. Okay, so the numbers that you repeated there, the vast majority of those missiles and drones were intercepted. They were shot down. So when you have some that get through, this is an intentional and systemic plan to overwhelm Ukraine's air defense systems. It's essentially a statement, and it's targeting civilians. And a lot of these things, they get intercepted and they fall into areas that perhaps weren't being targeted. That's worth noting as well. But yes, there's no getting into the mind of President Putin, but we have seen this in the past. He may be talking peace on one side, but at the same time launching these attacks. And what you saw last night and what we witnessed last night was the largest bombardment of the Capitol this year. So it really doesn't bode well. The sort of messaging there is that he can do it, and it was intentional. And for the first time, because it's very rare, President Trump has been very critical of President Zelensky. Much rarer for him to criticize Putin himself.
Yeah, we'll see what the result of that is. Charlie D'Agata, thank you so much, live for us at the Pentagon. All right, let's take you to the Vatican now, where St. Peter's Basilica was open all night long as people have been lining up there since early Wednesday morning to pay their respects to the late Pope Francis. We want to give you an overview of the events playing out in Vatican City. Now, until tomorrow, the public viewing is taking place right here inside the Basilica. And on Saturday, church and world leaders will gather at St. Peter's for the funeral, the mass funeral of Pope Francis, as crowds are expected to fill St. Peter's Square. Now, in a break with recent tradition, the Pope will not be buried at the Vatican. Instead, he asked to be buried at the Basilica of St. Mary Major. That's across Rome. Then 15 to 20 days after the Pope's death, the cardinal electors will gather over here at the Sistine Chapel for the conclave. The cardinals will be sealed off from the world to start the process of selecting the next pope by casting secret ballots until a new pope is chosen. And as you can imagine, security is tight. Here's Army, police, and civil protection officers patrolling St. Peter's Square, managing this influx of people. Let's bring in CBS News Papal contributor Francis Roca. He is live for us in Rome. Francis, thank you for being with us. How does Pope Francis's viewing compare to popes of the past?
Well, the Vatican today told us that in the first 24 hours that the Basilica was open, and it was open all night for people to come and mourners to come and pay their respects, about 50,000, a little bit more than 50,000 people filed through. Now, that's a big number. But to give you some perspective, in 2005, when John Paul was lying in state, 500,000 people passed through in the same period of time, the first 24 hours, so 10 times as many. It's a good question as to why this is. One factor could be that the Poles, who are very united with their fellow Pole, John Paul, came a bus ride away from Poland. That was surely a big factor. Another factor was perhaps that conservative Catholics of the kind that were very devoted to John Paul are more likely to take pilgrimages and engage in these kind of traditional devotional activities. Yet another is that we live in a more fragmented age now. People don't see the same movies, they don't watch the same TV shows, and maybe a single figure like John Paul, who was so dominant, doesn't exist anymore. And finally, John Paul was the victor of the Cold War. He embodied the spirit of the age in a way that Francis politically doesn't, because in the political trends in his native Argentina, in the United States, and in Europe and elsewhere are right-wing populism, are against the positions that Francis took. So for all these reasons, maybe the bond between the people and Francis was less intense than it was with John Paul.
Yeah, it's interesting to watch this. And it's worth noting the number of cardinal electors is actually getting smaller. How do you think that's going to impact conclave?
Well, the two cardinal electors have said that they can't attend because of reasons of health. Both of them are considered conservatives, and one cardinal who considers himself a conservative said that's bad for our side. So that's happening. So if that continues, we'll see. Every vote counts.
And, you know, Friday is the final chance to see Pope Francis. That's tomorrow. Can you take us through the next couple of days here? And can you see the Vatican getting ready for this influx of people as they prepare for the funeral?
Well, yeah, the security, as you mentioned earlier, is getting tighter. On Friday, tomorrow night, the coffin will be sealed. On Saturday morning, there'll be the funeral, and then there'll be this extraordinary procession to St. Mary Major, to the other basilica, where he's going to be buried, because it's been a long time since the Pope has not been buried in the Vatican Basilica. And yeah, the security is going to be tight. It shall be extra tight once you have these dozens and dozens of world leaders, including President Trump here. And so we'll be seeing that intensify, and it'll be harder to get in and out of this area surely by Saturday.
Francis Roca, live for us in Rome. Thank you so much. Looks like a beautiful day there. And we will bring you the funeral of Pope Francis on Saturday in a CBS News special report. Coverage begins at 4 a.m. Eastern, 1 a.m. Pacific on CBS News, and streaming right here on CBS News 24/7 and Paramount Plus. Turning our monitors now to New Jersey as the Jones Road wildfire has just exploded in size overnight. You're looking at video from the fire along the Garden State Parkway that's in Lacey Township. A suspect has been charged with aggravated arson in connection to this fire. He's 19-year-old Joseph Kling, and he's accused of setting wooden pallets on fire and then failing to extinguish them fully before leaving the scene. CBS News Philadelphia reporter Brandon Goldner has the very latest.
Thick smoke is blanketing parts of Ocean County, New Jersey, as a result of this massive wildfire that is burning at over 13,000 acres. Take a look at this business right here. This business was destroyed as a result of this fire. You can see piles of rubble here. This was Liberty Door and Awning. Thankfully, no one was injured as a result of this destruction right here, but a lot of people say they're still feeling the trauma as a result of seeing this fire and having to evacuate. Now, we do know that more than 5,000 people, they are waking up this morning for the first time since they were having to evacuate on Tuesday. And many people actually decided not to come to their homes because of this heavy smoke that's still blanketing the area. Many people say it just was too much smoke that was going through the air. Now, we do know from firefighters they still have a lot of people out here trying to control this fire. It is 50% contained, though we do know that that may be updated through the morning. Firefighters are hoping that with rain forecasted in the area coming up later this week, that they hope that they'll have the fire fully contained by the weekend. So far, this one business was the only one that was destroyed. There are several outbuildings as well as vehicles that were destroyed as a result of this fire. There are a few local roads that are still shut down as a result of this fire, though the major roadways have since reopened.
Well, coming up, Trump pushing back against China's claims that tariff negotiations aren't happening. Plus, CEOs from major retailers say tariffs could lead to empty store shelves in just a matter of weeks. You're watching CBS News 24/7. Welcome back to CBS News 24/7. Let's take a look at the markets right now. The Dow currently hovering around 396 points right now. Trump claiming moments ago that trade talks are happening with China, would not say with whom. Now, this all comes after a reported warning from top American retail CEOs that tariffs will empty store shelves in just a matter of weeks. Now, a spokesperson for Beijing says their door is wide open for talks, but deny that negotiations were already underway.
Can you clarify with whom the U.S. is speaking with China? They're saying it's fake news that trade talks are happening.
Well, they had a meeting this morning, so I can't tell you. It doesn't matter who they is. We may reveal it later, but they had meetings this morning, and we've been meeting with China.
CBS News business contributor Javier Deved Can is with us to help break it all down for us. He's also a business editor for the Dallas Morning News, so he knows what he's talking about. I want to get your reaction to the president's comments just within the last hour or so.
Look, it may be hard to believe, but Mexico actually supplanted China as the U.S.'s largest trading partner a few years ago. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is the fact is China needs the U.S. and the U.S. needs China. It's very much a symbiotic relationship. We've been talking about decoupling for years, but the Trump administration, the climb down that we've seen over the last several days, it really does underscore the fact that there's no easy way to do that. China's playing hardball right now because while the president initially held all the cards, he kind of overplayed his hand. And now we're talking about levies of over 100%. That's prices more than doubling on some goods. So honestly, the lesson of the last few weeks is clear. Like it's far easier proposition to sort of talk about decoupling from China or taking a hard line against China than it is to execute in reality.
So the Federal Reserve has what's called as a beige book, and it's a report on current economic conditions. And it is now reporting pervasive uncertainty in response to Trump's tariffs, saying businesses are already seeing increased costs. So what does this mean? Does this mean that consumers can soon see major price hikes here?
Yeah, I mean, this is another hard lesson of the trade wars. No company is going to absorb higher costs on principle without passing them along to consumers. It's not grounded in reality. And it's why the Federal Reserve has been hesitant to cut rates in the first place, because price pressures really haven't been licked at all. And tariffs are an absolute force multiplier for inflation. So the Beige Book reports that prices were basically on the rise across districts. A lot of businesses are bracing themselves for higher costs as a result of the tariffs. And one story that we reported just last week at the Dallas Morning News is there are a number of specialty retailers, people that make holiday costumes for Halloween and Christmas. They're already warning that both of these holidays are in jeopardy. We're only in March or April rather, but we're months away from the major holidays, but they're already bracing themselves for the impact of that.
Yeah, a lot of these small businesses here in the States are already doing their buying for those holidays. The state of California just surpassed Japan, becoming the 4th largest economy in the world. That's according to new data from the International Monetary Fund. Could this help California's case in its lawsuit against the Trump administration to stop its tariff policies?
Yeah, look, it's interesting because much of the conversation about the Golden State is how much population and businesses they've lost over the last several years to places like Texas, where I am, and Florida, mainly because of overregulation and high taxes and the quality, sort of the declining quality of life. But there's still some life left yet in that state. And interestingly, I had a conversation with the CEO of the NASDAQ about their market. They're planning to move to Dallas, but she had this interesting sort of observation that when, a competition is good and that when one state thrives, it's good for the economy as a whole. So you can't isolate one economy or one market, especially not one as big as California's, and just sort of put it on the sidelines. California still has certain economic advantages that is good for the U.S. overall. It's not just about California or any specific region. It really is about the overall performance of the U.S. economy.
Javier Deved, thank you so much. Always insightful to talk to you. Thank you for your insight. All right, rising diplomatic tensions in South Asia as India and Pakistan go tit for tat after Tuesday's deadly attack in Indian-controlled Kashmir. Both countries now canceling visas for each other's nationals. Let's get right to CBS News correspondent Chanel Call, who is following the story from our newsroom. Chanel, what are the new developments with this?
So, Liz, we know 26 people were killed and 17 others were injured in that attack on Tuesday, making this the deadliest attack on tourists in Kashmir in 25 years. To put this into perspective for our American viewers, this happened in Pahalgam, which is a really popular tourist destination in northern India. This is where my family is from. I've actually been there myself, so I can tell you it's about 30 miles from the main city of Srinagar. This is a very mountainous region, Liz. There are hills and valleys, and it's often referred to by Indians as a mini Switzerland. So certainly a very popular tourist spot. The attack, though, has now prompted fear, chaos, and panic, not just in the state of Kashmir, but across the country. Earlier today, I spoke to a man who was born in Kashmir. He left during the civil unrest, and then this week, he returned to Kashmir for the first time in almost 40 years. He was about 200 miles away from where the attack happened on Monday. Listen to his account.
But the next day, next morning, when everybody knew what had happened, there was a complete lull in the city. Of course, the Traders Association, all businesses were shut down. They had basically called for a shutdown in protest against this massacre, I would call it. And so you could see in the atmosphere that something grave had happened. And there was hardly any tourists seen on the street. Very few people who were probably already there, had no choice, but they were just kind of strolling the boulevard and the streets. But it was a totally different picture from what I had seen for the last 5 days.
And the timing here is really important to mention. You know, so many of my friends and family that I've been speaking to in Kashmir today have said they've noticed an economic boom in recent years. The attack drawing international condemnation, including from President Donald Trump. He wrote this on Truth Social, saying the United States stands strong with India against terrorism. Now, this attack also notably happened to coincide with Vice President J.D. Vance's trip to India. And you mentioned this tensions now rising between India and Pakistan. Both countries have canceled visas for each other's nationals. India also now, by the way, saying it will cut the number of diplomatic staff in Pakistan and close the only functional land border crossing between the two countries. In response, Liz, Pakistan also closing its airspace for all Indian-owned or operated airlines and suspended all trade with India, including to and from any third country. So again, a very fluid situation. We'll keep you posted here on CBS News 24/7.
Chanel, I'm so sorry this story has hit so close to home. Thank you so much for that report. The National Institutes of Health is gathering up private medical records for researchers as part of Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s new effort to study autism. Let's pull up the TikTok tube and let Alex Tin explains what this all means. Alex?
We learned two big things today about how Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is planning on actually studying the causes of autism, which has been a major priority of his. First, we learned that the NIH, that's the National Institutes of Health, is planning on amassing a large amount of confidential medical records from all across the country. Everything from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services to data from private pharmacy chains all the way down to smartwatch data that they're going to try to link together in an attempt to unlock what they think is causing autism. Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, that's the head of the NIH, he says he recognizes there are patient privacy concerns by linking all of this data together. He says there are going to be state-of-the-art protections and says that the researchers picked for Kennedy's autism studies won't be able to download their own personal copy of this data, only access it within this secure platform that they're creating. The second thing that we learned about Kennedy's autism studies is that they're planning on creating a new registry. They're calling it a disease registry of people with autism in the country. We don't have a lot of details on what that registry will look like now, but they're hoping that they'll be able to integrate that data into this new platform and potentially accelerate the answers that they've been hoping to get on a rapid timeline.
Alex, thank you so much for that report. And another story we're following is President Trump claims Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland man who was mistakenly deported, has MS-13 tattoos on his hand. He's showing a picture there. But is that true? Let's go back to the TikTok tube because Alex Clark and the CBS News Confirmed team did a fact check.
So President Trump tweeted this image, claiming that a Maryland man named Kilmar Abrego Garcia had, quote, MS-13 tattooed to his knuckles. But it's not accurate. Abrego Garcia was one of more than 200 men deported to El Salvador in March. This image does not match any of the other known images of Abrego Garcia's hands. We analyzed it, and here's what we found. The image Trump shared includes the letters MS-13 at the top of the hand, as well as labels beneath the tattoos. But in this photo, taken during a meeting with Senator Chris Van Hollen, those markings aren't there. Same with this older photo posted by Abrego Garcia's wife in 2019. It's unclear who added the labels, but they don't appear in any of the verified images of Abrego Garcia that we found. They've been digitally added. Some people actually believe that the letters MS-13 were tattooed on his hands. In this close-up, you can see a smiley face, a skull, a cross, and a leaf which the Trump administration has identified as marijuana, which starts with the letter M. But experts say that MS-13 gang members often tattoo M, MS, or 13 very clearly on their body, along with imagery of the devil, which does not appear in any of these photos. We've reached out to the White House and have not gotten a response. Abrego Garcia had been granted legal protection from deportation to El Salvador in 2019, and his attorneys maintain that he is not an MS-13 gang member. And he's still detained in El Salvador, despite a federal judge ruling that the Trump administration must act to facilitate his return, as well as update them on the steps they're taking.
The CBS News Confirmed team has such great content on TikTok and Instagram, so if you don't already, be sure to follow them with the handle CBS News. Pretty easy. Well, do you have your real ID? If not, you better get on that. The deadline is just weeks away. We caught up with one woman who did everything right to beat the deadline, but is currently being denied a license because she was never issued a key document. Now, some lawmakers are coming to her rescue. You're watching CBS News 24/7. With the Real ID deadline now just weeks away, Americans across the country are lining up at DMV offices to get their new driver's license. But in Florida, one woman says she is caught in limbo. Jeanette Gant Palmer, born during the Jim Crow era in Aiken County, South Carolina, was never issued a birth certificate, and without it, the DMV won't renew her license. CBS News Miami's Tanya Francois explains how state and federal lawmakers are stepping in to help.
Jeanette Gant Palmer was born in Aiken County, South Carolina, back in February of 1949.
76 years blessed.
But this retired postal worker has called Miami home for 55 years.
My car is paid for, my house is paid for, I'm going to drive.
She's had several Florida driver's licenses in the past, showing us her latest two. On the day before her birthday, she went to renew it and hit a roadblock.
After waiting 2 hours in the line, I said, I'd like to renew my driver's license. Oh no, we need this and we need that. For what? What reason? I never had it before.
Gant Palmer needed her birth certificate or passport to prove her identity. Gant Palmer has neither.
In those days, we were born at home. You didn't know about going to no hospital. The lady came to your house to help your mom have the baby.
For 42 years, she worked at the post office. She also drove school buses with a valid license. So how were you able to get a driver's license to begin with?
That's what I asked the driver's license place.
Gant Palmer says she went to the DMV with every document she has, trying to verify her legal existence, including her Social Security card. She also has this letter from the state of South Carolina saying they've searched through decades of records and there's no proof of her birth. I called the Aiken County, South Carolina Office of Vital Statistics. They said they can get Gant Palmer a delayed birth certificate, but it's a lengthy process. It involves her getting her school records from way back in the 1950s. They say she can also get a court order from a judge.
So my aunt is also my constituent.
Florida State Representative Ashley Gant is Gant Palmer's niece. She stepped in trying to help.
I was able to get an extension for 90 days. I'm probably going to reach out to a House member that I met who serves in South Carolina.
So what are you going to do?
I don't know. God's going to work it out, though. I don't know. But I need my driver's license. I know that much.
All right, check this out. Flash flooding in Louisiana today forced some people to abandon their cars and left semi-trucks just stranded there. This video taken earlier today in Lafayette, where some areas around downtown got over 5 inches of rain. I want to bring in Jessica Birch, who's tracking severe weather moving across the country, it seems.
Widespread throughout these communities, anywhere from the south all the way up into areas like New Jersey, dealing with that fire. Still, we're seeing on and off showers heading into this weekend's forecast. So let's actually start just below me. I'm going to pull up the map, and I want to show you what we're gearing up for around the corner. Throughout the next 48 hours, throughout the south, we're dealing with active storms in the forecast, anywhere up to around 2 to 3 inches falling locally. We also track those storms off into the northeast, where just around the corner, this could be actually really helpful for our friends all the way off into New Jersey. At the same time, we're dealing with these thunderstorms bringing in heavy amounts of rain, gusty winds at times. The winds are the big concern when it comes to that fire over there. And we could even see a potential for hail too. So let's actually bring that map up real fast. I want to talk about this just a little bit more. This fire broke out in size just throughout the past 48 hours. I mean, we've seen this become the largest fire all the way over into New Jersey in the past 20 years. The Jones Road fire continuing to push smoke up into New York City and just along that east coastline, bringing in air quality alerts as we head into the afternoon and evening hours tonight. That surface smoke still stays strong. We're going to continue to keep a close eye on the rainfall widespread throughout the states, though, into the coming days. We're gearing up for possible thunderstorms, lots of showers, though, anywhere up to around 1/4 inch of rain falling locally just along that shoreline. We could even see more in some of those inland areas. Now, the winds are expected to kick up just a little bit more, but let's zoom out a little bit larger in scale. The Climate Prediction Center showing wetter than normal conditions anywhere from Texas all the way over into the south, Louisiana included. So we are gearing up for the next 6 to 10 days to look pretty tropical down into the south, of course, but of course really messy when it comes to those thunderstorms all the way up into the northeast. We'll have more on that coming up in a bit. Liz.
All right, Jess, thank you. Football fans, listen up. Right now, Green Bay, Wisconsin, prepping for tonight's NFL draft. And our cameras got a behind-the-scenes look at the Draft Experience Lounge. Ooh, looks cool. You can see fans are going to have access to all kinds of good food, drinks, and some fun games. CBS News Boston sent their crew to Green Bay for more on what's on the line for the New England Patriots. Take a listen to that preview.
WBZ's Dan Roach is there with what we can expect.
Hello, everyone. We're here in Wisconsin getting ready for the NFL draft tonight. The Patriots, of course, picking number 4 overall. And if things go as expected, it's going to be quarterback Cam Ward, number 1, running back, cornerback Travis Hunter, the Heisman Trophy winner, number 2, and then edge rusher Abdul Carter, number 3. then the Patriots sit at number 4. And all indications are mock drafts everywhere that Mike Vrabel and company will select Will Campbell, big offensive tackle out of LSU, allowing just 2 sacks in the last 2 years in really good competition. LSU battling SEC foes, one of the best conferences in all of America. We'll talk to Will Campbell coming up after he's selected, if it's him, whoever the Pats take at number 4. You'll see that on the WBZ 11 o'clock news. We'll preview the draft and the Pats and what they'll do coming up starting at 5 on the WBZ news as well, so stay with us for that. In Wisconsin with the Patriots, I'm Dan Roach, WBZ Sports.
I love watching the NFL draft. I loved hearing all the stories about these young athletes and their dreams coming true. I always get a little misty when I hear those stories. All right, you got to see these images released by NASA today. The agency captured these stunning pictures using the Hubble Space Telescope. It launched into Earth's orbit 35 years ago today, and it has since revolutionized our understanding of space, all thanks to its crystal clear view of the universe. Isn't that stunning? Scientists use the telescope to observe distant stars and galaxies, as well as some of the planets in our own solar system. So let's take you back to the Kennedy Space Center on April 24th, 1990. This was the moment the telescope was launched into space, all 24,000 pounds of it tucked inside of the Discovery space shuttle. Hubble has made more than 1 million observations in its lifetime, and we expect it to make many more in the years to come. We have much more right here ahead on CBS News 24/7. In just a few minutes, NASA's giving us a sneak peek at an upcoming spacewalk, also talking about the mission from the Johnson Space Center in Houston. And a live look now inside St. Peter's Basilica. We'll have much more on the next steps for the Vatican and funeral preparations as the world says goodbye to Pope Francis. And a live look at the White House, where our reporters are standing by to enter the Oval Office, where President Trump is meeting with the Norwegian Prime Minister to talk tariffs and the Russia-Ukraine war. Lindsay Reiser joins us after the break. You're watching CBS News 24/7.